Hello, my friends. I hope you're doing well today. Before we get started, I gently encourage you to run outside and grab some leaves of your own and paint along with me if you're feeling it, but also if you just want to hang out, I'm happy to keep you company. The colors that I'm going to be using for this are actually mainly the ones that are poured in that little circular palette, and I actually got those I did a autumn leaves watercolor class a few years ago, and as part of the class she gave out these palettes with like a pre-designed palette of colors that worked really well for leaves, so I got to cheat a little bit there, but I knew that there wasn't a nice cool green in that palette, so I grabbed my other palette to pull some colors out of there as I needed, which I use later in the video. I'm gonna link that other palette in the description if you're curious what it is. I can't remember the name of it off the top of my head. So I started with this gorgeous maple leaf, although as I'm saying that, I'm like, is that a maple leaf? It must be. It looks exactly like a maple leaf. I'm just not super tree knowledgeable, so for all I know, it's some like other leaf that kind of looks like a maple leaf and is not really. So if you're like an arborist or something, please hit me up in the comments and confirm for me whether this is a legit maple leaf. When I'm working with my usual watercolor palette, I have a sheet where I've kind of done swatches of all the colors in the palette that I can refer to see what colors I want. But for this one, it was just a random palette I had kicking around, and I didn't have any swatches of it, so I needed to do that. So I grabbed an old mixed media sketchbook and on the back of a page just did some swatches of all the colors so that I could decide which colors from the palette I wanted to use for each leaf. And I just kind of went around the circle, and I didn't do it in a very organized way, so I just had to kind of keep track in my mind of, okay, which one was which that I swatched, and it worked out okay. So my goal for this piece was not to make like a perfectly laid out final watercolor piece. It was more about practicing my watercolor skills and seeing if I could choose colors and do blending techniques that represented the leaves really well. So I wasn't overly concerned about making anything perfect. And I'm still actually pretty happy with how the final piece turned out. But something with watercolors that always, and this is actually the case for like Copic markers and a lot of mediums I've picked up recently, is I really have to fight my instinct to trace around the shape that I want to make first and then fill in the inside, because that's how I've always, like as a little kid, they always tell you trace the outside and then fill in the inside, and that'll make your coloring neater. And so at least I like grew up on that kind of method, and it's the same method I use when I'm doing like digital art or drawing sketches. I sketch first, make trace outlines, and then fill in colors later. But with things like watercolor and Copic markers, where you're doing a lot of blending, you actually want to do the opposite, where you start and kind of work your way from one side to the other, because otherwise you're not going to get the beautiful blending that these mediums are so amazing at. This little branch of leaf just has the most beautiful colors. I thought it would be so fun to try and see if I could do justice to the yellow edges with the dark red coming in. And there's also, it's hard to see from this far away, but there's little specks of green in it too. So I had a lot of fun doing this one. And for this one, I did a really light outline, because I find when you're trying to make a branch look like a proper branch, it's really hard to do that freehand. So I wanted to do the outline for this one first. Oh, I just love so much how that like reddish burgundy color blends with the yellow. I feel like it didn't end up looking exactly like the leaves, but it still ended up looking pretty cool, and I just added those little flecks of green to make it as close to those original leaves as I could. So these little guys I spotted in this little patch of trees in the dog park that we usually go to, and I like dove into the bushes to grab them off of the tree because I just love how there was some leaves that were still orange and yellow, and then some that were this like greenish purple on the same tree, and I wanted to do both of them together side by side. So the reason why there's a random blue spot on the page is because I accidentally pranked myself, and I think what happened is I tainted my green paint with blue, and so when I swatched I tainted my blue paint with green, because when I swatched it initially it was like a cooler green, and then I went to use it now and it was straight up blue, so I had to go into that other palette and grab the shade of green that I actually wanted, which was more of a cool blue, a cool green. Although it's so interesting rewatching yourself do stuff, because now that I'm looking at it, I'm like, that's a warm green. It's got more of like a yellow tone to it, like the original leaf that I was painting. And for some reason, my brain went for the cooler green when I was painting it. It's so interesting how just like in the moment you process stuff differently, and now that I'm seeing it after the fact, I can see, no, that's not the color I wanted, and I think that's part of the reason why this particular leaf ended up being my least favorite on the whole page. It just is kind of a mess, you'll see. But I actually really love that me watching it back right now, like I looked at this piece afterwards and I was like, I don't like that leaf and I don't know why, but now talking it through with you, I finally figured out what I kind of did that messed it up and didn't make it look right. So that's pretty cool. One thing that I do kind of struggle with watercolors, which you can kind of see in this leaf and also the maple leaf that I was doing, is getting the shape that I want when I'm doing it free-handedly without trying to kind of do an outline first, because I know that it's going to make like an obvious outline where the paint is going to dry first if I go in and fill the inside later. So if you are a watercolorer, and you have any tips for doing this technique, I would love to hear it. I'm kind of thinking maybe the best way to go about it would be to do like a pencil outline of the shape I want first, and then I'll have an easier time being able to get the shape that I want. But let me know your thoughts. When I was out leaf collecting, I decided to also grab this still very green little branch, partially because I just really liked the leaves and how symmetrical it was, and also because I just thought that it would be some good practice to do some flat colors in watercolor, because that is an important watercolor skill too. So we did a little bit of a time warp and jumped ahead to pretty much the whole page being filled, because to be totally honest with you, I got a little in over my head and I was like, I can also film some footage for an Instagram reel while filming for YouTube, and I won't get confused and forget to turn on one of my cameras. That totally won't happen. But that's exactly what happened. So here we are, skipped way far ahead, and now actually we've jumped ahead even further because I had to let the piece dry completely, and then I came back and started doing some colored pencil work on it, and then I remembered to turn on the camera again. So yeah, I decided that I wanted to finish off this piece because, again, my goal was to like work with the watercolors and also see how much I could kind of represent the leaves accurately with a variety of mediums. So I decided to use some colored pencils to add the details on the leaves. And so I was kind of, my colored pencils, I've been collecting Prismacolor Premier pencils, and I have, rather than buying like a big set because there's lots of colors I knew I wouldn't use, I've just been like, every time I go to the art store I grab like 2 or 3 new pencils, and my color palette I gravitate towards very much within these like autumn leafy colors. I really like earthy, more desaturated, that's the term that I want. Earthier, more desaturated colors. Pastels as another way to put that. So the palette that I had fit right in, and so a lot of the colors I had on hand were pretty perfect for these leaves. This poor little like maroony yellow colored leaf at the top, I really messed it up by, when I was coloring in the details for the maple leaf, I like brushed it with my hand, and that's why it's really, all the color is gone from the top. And then there just must have been a lot of water there because it also was still wet, so that's why I stopped doing the details there and moved on, and I'm testing to make sure this yellow leaf at the top is good enough to start drawing on. And I think this yellow guy at the top is probably one of my favorites on the page. The maple leaf was nice too, and I also really liked all of the other maroony yellow ones from that guy at the bottom there. But this yellow one at the top I felt like was the closest to kind of representing a real leaf and looked the most like its reference, which I was pretty proud of. Like I was saying before, that like green and maroon one ended up being my least favorite, and I didn't really particularly like its little buddy from the same tree either. I loved the original leaves, but I really wasn't happy with the shapes that I ended up for them. I tried to compensate for that by outlining them with the colored pencil, and then just ended up not really liking that, but you can't win them all. A few of the leaves, the line work that I did with the colored pencils didn't turn out super great because, as I was saying, I had to wait for the piece to dry, but I also was losing daylight to film by, so I was kind of rushing it and didn't really have time to let it dry completely. So yeah, that guy at the top middle is quite faint, and it's because it was dry. But okay, I wanted to show you close up. Look at this guy at the bottom. I feel like that one I got really close to the original yellow and maroon mix with the green flecks. I was quite pleased with that one. So here she is, all done, all my leaves painted, all the details drawn in. Again, not a perfect piece, but I was really happy with my result overall because I do feel like I got some good practice in and I did justice to a lot of the leaves. Oh, and then after, I didn't film this part, but I decided the page is a little empty, so I added some little sparkles and doodles to make it more fun, which I think kind of made it look more like a full piece overall, so I might hang it on my wall somewhere. We'll see.